We're here on Senate Bill 2056. Do you want the reviser to do an overview?
Yeah, I think it'd be good if he do an overview. The only comment I would say, looks like we've got 390 already in, so 351. So maybe we could skip 390. I don't believe it's probably necessary. So why don't you just start at 2056 and work through the list?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Senate substitute for House Bill 2056 is a substitute bill. The original contents of 2056 was a bill dealing with the regulation of kratom products. The Senate stripped out those contents and inserted the provisions you see here in conference. This would first provide regulation on the use of remote ballot boxes, otherwise known as drop boxes, by county election offices. The provisions would limit county election offices to only one remote ballot box for each election unless the county had more than 30,000 registered voters in the county. And then it could use an additional remote ballot box for every 30,000 registered voters in that county. It would require that the box only be open and accessible if it's continuously observed by an employee of the county election office, if it's located inside a public building where employees of the public, the state or municipality are physically present, or if it's located inside a non-public building and continuously observed by two authorized poll agents who are not registered with the same political party. The ballot boxes are to be closed and not accessible when the county election office is closed. Each ballot box would have a sign conspicuously posted that states the statutory limit on the number of advanced voting ballots that may be transmitted by a person other than the voter, and the penalty for violations of that statute. It does direct the Secretary of State to adopt rules and regulations to implement and enforce the provisions of this section with respect to remote ballot boxes, and defines a remote ballot box as any form of a locked ballot box designated by the county election officer as available for use in depositing advanced voting ballots. The remainder of House Bill 2056, as amended by the Senate, relates to when advanced voting ballots can be received by the county election office. The amendment would change it from the 3 days after election day to those ballots would have to be received by 7 p.m. on the day of the election. The bill also amends various statutes on the election code to add 3 days to the request and submission deadlines for advanced voting ballots. So when you can request one and receive one from the county election office, adds 3 days on the front end of that period as well. The bill also makes an amendment that a voter may return an advanced voting ballot by personal delivery, by mail, by depositing in a remote ballot box, and that voting by mail can be done by the United States Postal Service or any other delivery service that provides the voter with a receipt indicating that the ballot was mailed and allows the voter to verify that the ballot was delivered. The effective date on these amendments would be the Kansas Register.
Okay.
Okay. Jason, give me some clarification here. So if you drop it of your ballot in the mail the day before election day, and it does not arrive on election day, then it wouldn't be counted?
That is correct.
Maybe I've got a question. Is that in violation of federal law? I mean, the federals.
No.
No, it's not.
It is not.
Okay, thank you.
The committee voted against that measure and stayed with the 3. That's just for the record. So, thank you.
You heard this bill in the House election?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, one of the things when this was going on, when we were actually having the hearing or right around that time, we actually had a mail-in ballot going on in Olathe. And on the mail-in ballots, they give you a certain day you have to be in. And then if it comes in later, your vote's not counted. So if you look at the mail-in statute on a mail-in election, you've got it one way. And, apparently, a few years ago, we changed the statute on the actual elections to go 3 days after. Now, our post offices operate different than they used to when they stamp the mail. I think this is an issue. I don't know that we can know if that ballot, when it is actually officially hitting the mailbox or the mail system. And, it could be counted later than the normal election if we stayed with the 3 days. Right now, we're using, on the mail-in ballot elections, the last one in Olathe was just the other day for mail-in bond, and it actually, I believe it stopped the day of or the day before at noon, and it had to be in. So I'm really strong on this. Election day is election day. That's something my committee, the House, prevailed on. I think we've got some work on the 3-day provision that we put in. Secretary of State's office told us we'd have people coming in over the weekend. I put that provision in to try to give 3 more days, but it seems like no one's really given us much credit for it. So I'd be willing to just remove them 3 days and take the 3 days before back to like it was prior. And, but I think that's something that we've got to work on. I think Senator Fasquedo wants to make a comment.
Thank you, both, Mr. Chairman. So I appreciate what you just said about putting the 3 days back to where it was previously, but just for the record, I want
Not
to,
the mail-in, the 3 days that we put in, moving it back past 21 days.
so I want to share this, and hopefully it can help us all. And this is by way of our fantastic Senator Francisco, which kind of explains that piece, and I think maybe will help us as we go along to address that issue. But I did have
I'm sorry.
and there's a couple of more for staff if they need it, Mr. Chairman. So, but I did want to ask the vice chair here, can you restate, your vice chair, can he restate his statement? You made a statement.
I said that thank you, Mr. Chair. That the House committee voted against the same day voting requirement. It was considered.
Was that so it was in committee, not on the floor?
Not on the floor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, these are my two chairmen. I have the luxury of being both on the Fed and State Committee and the Elections Committee. This year, election bills went to both committees. These are my two chairs of the respective committees, and I appreciate their leadership. Senator, I heard you say you felt strongly about this provision. I can wager not as strongly as I. In 2017, a good-looking young man in the House of Representatives sponsored House Bill 2158. It passed almost unanimously in both the House and the Senate to extend that 3 days from Election Day if it was postmarked by 7 o'clock that day. Had to be postmarked, still does. There's no lack of understanding as to whether you count it or not. If it's not postmarked by 7 p.m. on Election Day, it does not count. What the bill was introduced, or the purpose of it, was to address a changing situation in the United States Post Office. I will give my city as an example. Before then, I could put a letter in the mail and expect it to be delivered the very next day in the city of Topeka. But the post office began a process of closing a number of those processing centers, so the mail, instead of being processed here in Topeka, it began to be processed in Kansas City. So rather than get there the next day, the mail first went to Kansas City one day and then back to Topeka the next day. That's Topeka. It's even worse in other parts of the state, particularly in some of the rural areas where the mail goes to Texas, it goes to Nebraska. And if you happen to be in the right place, like Johnson County, you can still expect your mail to come the next day. But it's not the same all across the state. And one of the purposes of the bill was to give all voters an equal footing. And the bill that was passed, like I said, almost unanimously in both chambers, said we will accept it so long as it is mailed by 7 o'clock on Election Day and received by the following Friday. That bill, that law, is working exactly as it was intended. This last year, our testimony that we heard in the House committee was some 32,000 ballots came in that category and were counted that wouldn't otherwise have been counted but for that law. There was no testimony, and my chairman can correct me if I'm wrong, there was no testimony in opposition, or let me say, there was no testimony that there was any problem with the bill other than the notion that, as you said, Election Day is Election Day. That's not true. Even with the adoption of this proposal to eliminate this 3-day grace period, ballots will still be counted even after that time period. They're called provisional ballots, and they are in a much larger quantity than the amount that we're talking about by mail. So the election results will not be final until that canvass and when all the provisional ballots are counted. So as far as that being a motivation, I don't see it. This is one that you and I are going to have to agree to disagree at some point, because I am not going to be convinced that we need to go back in time and undo what was accomplished successfully as it was clearly intended. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Who's chairman, by the way, of this committee? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, you know, I mean, everybody's got their own statements to make. I definitely probably get as much as anybody about the post office. My brother, for a lot of years, he was one of the drivers taking the mail from the Topeka Sort Center back to Kansas City, Missouri, and back. He did that twice a night. He's hauled to every mail center in Kansas. I get they got rid of a lot of them, Fort Scott, all across the state. You know, the mail does, but they're also automated and quicker than they've ever been too. You know, when I mail my bill and it says to be there on this date and it misses, you know, you get it in the mail as quick as you can. You know, no different than on them bond issues that just happened in Olathe. If you mailed it a day late, your vote didn't count. If you wait till the day of the election or the day before, your vote might not count. But if you mailed it a week before, 3 days before, it got there. But you know, I have a faith in the mail system. We actually added a couple other ways you could use FedEx, UPS into this, I believe, because we heard some of that in testimony. Some people didn't have as much faith in the mail system as they did these other organizations. But I have faith in the mail system. It's, You know, it's when you put it in the box, it's no different than me making my house payment or anything else. So I don't know. I think we'll probably agree to disagree on that. And I don't know if, go ahead, Senator Fasfadel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, not to rain on your parade, but I'm going to give you a real-life situation. So, during the session, I mailed my insurance policy payment. I mailed it here from Topeka, and of course, in the statement, it says mail by this day, and it's due on this day. Mr. Chairman, I mailed it 3 days prior, because I have 7 days to mail it, and then some grace period. I mailed it 4 days prior to the time they suggest on the envelope, the invoice to mail it, and I got a late fee. It still didn't get mailed from Topeka to where it needed to go. Now, if I mailed it from Wichita, Kansas, it always got there on time. Mr. Chairman, also, I don't know if you do or not, or anybody else, other legislators in here, but I request a lot of official Senate certificates to be mailed out, and Corey, our Secretary of the Senate, will mail it, and it will take actually a month. It has taken a month to get from Topeka to Kansas City and then reroute it back to Wichita. And so I don't know. I'm the U.S. Postal Service, rain, sleet, or snow, but sometimes the mail has been late and not due to the person mailing.
One thing I don't think we've mentioned enough, a lot of people aren't like us. And what I mean by that is we probably have little difficulty marking our ballots and deciding who we want to vote for. But some people give it a lot more thought. And I've heard this statement, well, if you get your ballot 20 days ahead of time, why don't you just mail it sooner? Well, the campaign continues up until Election Day, and some people like to be more studious, careful, and focus on their choices as opposed to just running through it and marking an R or a D. So I would ask the committee to put yourself in those people's. It's hard to do because we are seasoned politicians. We have fairly hard and fast ideas on who we like as a candidate, but not everyone is like that. And I think we need to consider that people should have all the time necessary to decide who they want to cast their vote for, as long as we all abide by the same deadline, which this does not change the deadline for casting your vote. That was carefully crafted when we extended the deadline 3 days in terms of getting the mail. We did not extend the time that you had to exercise your right to vote. We still all have to vote by 7 p.m. on Election Day. And I think that's fair for those people that like to take their time to decide. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The only thing I would add to this is when I was coming off the floor earlier today, one of our sergeant of arms stopped me and showed me 6 envelopes, all addressed to a family not his, but he received in the mail for an April election here in Shawnee County. Came to his mailbox, not to where they were intended to. And on that, it had to be returned by Election Day by noon. There's no 3-day grace period. So why is it good for one but not the other?
I agree with you. I think the 3-day grace on that particular issue should be extended as well. It wasn't done at the time. No one brought it up, but I'm easily convinced that what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and I don't see any reason why that's not the amendment we're making to the law, is giving those mail ballots or mail-in elections exactly the same grace as this one. I don't know why we're retrenching instead of progressing.
I would go backward and say we've never heard of a issue with it being delivered by noon on election day. So I don't see the issue of going back to election day on mail-in ballots. That's just my personal opinion.
You know, over this last year, I mean, right now, I think the confidence of the voters are about as low as could be. And part of it is that, you know, they're seeing these elections, they go on and on and on. And election day never ends. And, you know, there's still tons of votes coming in after election. And, you know, I think it all comes down to, we've heard on the mail-in ballot, we stopped counting ballots on election day, but on a mail-in elections. But on our actual elections, we're taking them 3 days past. And I just don't buy it that the post office, I think they're probably more efficient than they were before. They've you know, modernized, got modern equipment. I'm guessing they probably got better production, their numbers, but I could be wrong. But the thing I hear in my district, they're tired of election day just dragging on. They want election day to be over on election night and the ballots to be counted. And, you know, I think our committee passed this bill out. We heard it, worked it, went to the floor, it passed out on the floor. So, I mean, I support this bill.
All right. This appears to be of some controversy or disagreement. May I suggest this? Let's put this aside for a moment and look at the other Senate bills that we have, and then we can come back to it. Would that be agreeable to you, Mr. Chairman?
That'll be agreeable, but, I mean, we want all the reports to go out together.
I understand, and I plan on coming back tonight
Sure.
until we resolve all of these issues. So what I'm proposing, and the House would be proposing to the Senate, is the following: that we do have a couple of vehicles, and we have a number of other Senate bills, and I'm looking at 351, which is the equipment, certifying poll books, equipment and destruction, how that's handled. And I've also have before me 438, which is the audit bill that was passed by the House and the Senate, 2570, I think. And then Senate Bill 39, which is the voter rolls. We would also have 389. The only concern I have about 389 is that it has another audit by random ballot selection. What I would propose is that we put these in a conference committee if we can agree to remove that language on the audit by random ballot selection, put it in one of our House bills. I'll have two, so I would probably look at 2138.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that'd be the one. The other one's 2056, and we could possibly get another shell moved over if we need for another.
For another.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
And I was going to have Jason just go through those real quick.
yeah, why don't we do that?
Jason, go 351, 438, 439, and 389.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Senate Bill 351 was brought to the Senate by the Secretary of State's office to define electronic poll book and regulate the use of electronic poll books by county election officers under the same statutes that are used to regulate electronic and electromechanical voting systems. Provisions were added throughout those statutes to require that no component of such systems be capable of being connected to the internet or any other communications or computer computer network, including any local area network, wireless network, cellular network, or satellite network, or Bluetooth or wireless communication technology. That is applicable to the systems. The electronic poll books that be used must be certified as being secure by the Secretary of State's office. And then there were provisions that before, during, and after the operation of a polling place, the election judges will make the electronic and electromechanical voting systems and vote tabulating equipment available to any candidate or any authorized poll agent for review to ensure that there was no connectivity to the internet for those devices. I will point out that on the Senate floor, an amendment was added to 351 to have the Secretary of State develop an affidavit system to be utilized for when ballots are being transferred to the election office and for purposes of conducting the election. The affidavit would list the information specified in the bill on what the numbers of the various types of ballots that are being transferred and would be signed by the individual who is receiving those ballots. It would be a level 9 non-person felony to violate this section by altering any information that's provided in the affidavit or providing false information in the affidavit with the intent to hinder, prevent, or defeat a fair election.
And 438?
Senate Bill 438 was also a bill brought to the Senate by the Secretary of State's office. It would direct the Secretary of State to conduct an audit in each even-numbered year of 4 counties on the procedures used for election administration and election records for elections held during the previous 2 calendar years. There are guidelines that one county would have a voting age population in excess of 90,000. One of the counties selected would have a voting age population of between 20,000 and 90,000, and 2 of the counties audited would have a voting age population of less than 20,000. The bill also made amendments with respect to current law regarding local audits that are conducted so that in even-numbered election years, if any federal, statewide, or state legislative race falls within 1% of the total number of votes cast tallied on election night as determined by the Secretary of State, then there will be an audit conducted on that race in accordance with subsection A of the bill. Finally, the Senate amended the bill to also require that upon publication of notice of the audit that is to be done at the local level, then the signed and certified official abstracts would be made available by the county election office for review by any authorized poll agent. And those abstracts would be from all precincts and not limited just to those that are subject to the audit. That will go into effect on July 1 of this year if it's enacted.
And the last one, and then we'll take questions from the members. 439.
Senate Bill 439 was a bill, I believe, also brought by the Secretary of State's office to the Senate. And this bill concerns a statute, allows removal of a registered voter from the voter rolls. The intent of the bill was to remove the voter from the voter rolls after they have received confirmation notice, trying to confirm that the voter is still at their current address, and that confirmation notice would be sent out if there had been no election-related activity by the registered voter for 4 calendar years.
Any questions of the revisor on these 3 bills? Yes.
Gosh, I'm going to, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm going to make a law that we have more mics here so we don't have to share. Thank you. So,
I don't mind sharing.
so Clay is in here in the room from the Secretary of State's office. And so I shared with him that I did a mailing in the entire apartment complex burned, fire burnt everything, everyone moved. And so all that mail came back to Topeka, and it was rerouted, and it took forever. Finally, I got these big bundles. And so how would you, Jason, in this measure, how would we notify those individuals? How, because all their mail came back, because now they had to relocate, so they had no address for you to mail anything to, stating that they had not voted and removing them from that role. How do you contact that person? I mean, their mail all came back to me. And so then I asked the Clay if we could have landlords or owners of that property, send the Secretary of State's office something saying everyone who lived at this address, because they all have the same address, just different apartment numbers. So how do you notify them? I just, Mr. Chairman, and I'm just have to say this, when Carrie Gooch left out of here, now I'm the only black person in the room, and I know we're trying to make voting safe and fair, but this measure here, removing people from the voting rolls, I understand, they want to clean up their voting rolls, and I want a good voting mailing list when I mail out to my constituents too, but I don't want it to be in a way where the senior citizen who's in rehab or just didn't get that letter. So, Jason, is it a certified letter that a person has to sign for, or is it just a random letter notifying them that are they still interested in voting or not before we remove them from the voting polls?
I do have a comment, and it's in the bill that they've had no election-related activity for any 4 calendar years. So it's not immediate, and I've got a personal story. My son graduated from college, I think, in 1997. He was a registered voter in Dickinson County, Kansas. Every time I went to the polls since then, I have to show my driver's license, which is correct, and they say John C. Barker, and I said, no, I'm John E. Barker. That's my son. He's been living in Texas for 20 years. He actually wrote a letter to our county clerk asking to be removed. They've not removed him yet. The second story is I have a daughter who graduated in 2012. Graduated in May. She had voted. She still is on the register, and when my wife and I go to the polls, we have to say, this is April, this is John. We are not Jessica, and we're not John C. And my daughter, who happens to be very active in Texas, understands this, has actually wrote a letter to my county clerk saying, please remove me, I'm voting in Texas. They're still on the polls. So go ahead. I just wanted to.
I believe, look, Jason, you want to, let's let Jason answer, if that's all right.
The statute does not require that it be by certified mail. I would defer to the county election officers as to the procedure in which they send out that confirmation notice. The new provisions proposed in Senate Bill 439, the notice would not be sent out until there was no election-related activity for 4 calendar year period, and the confirmation notice would have to be returned as undeliverable. In response to the question as to how to contact somebody who, when that mailing is undeliverable, I would again have to defer to the county election officers as to what their procedures would be to try and reach voters when the address they have on file is an undeliverable address.
Mr. Chairman, and Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, but we actually, on a lot of what the rankings concern is, we amended it to where someone actually had to respond or not. So if someone doesn't respond, they don't get taken off the rolls. They have to has to either be, they don't respond and that postcard comes back to undeliverable, or this person's moved, or no such person at this address. If nothing comes back, nothing happens.
I believe the process, if I remember, was about an 8-year process. And if they did come back and vote, they would vote provisional. If that's, I could be wrong, but that's what I recall. But I do recall also an 8-year process to get someone off. So it's not like if the place caught on fire, I'm guessing they probably would have their mail forwarded to their temporary location. Happens all the time. I had someone 2 houses down. They've probably been out of their house 8 or 9 months. I'm sure they're getting their mail at a temporary residence until it's back up. I don't know exactly how that works, but believe it or not, I think the post office is pretty good at that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The concern in House elections is probably the same as it is in Senate, and that is to have cleaner and fairer elections. And cleaner means clearer defined as to who's voting and whether or not that roll is still accurate. I believe that the majority of the House committee supports this type of action to be able to continue to make reasonable efforts to clean up the rolls so that at the state level and at the local level, there's accurate rolls for voting. So I believe we're in support of most of this measure.
Well, and I think Representative Barker probably gave the best example of a couple kids that lived there and now don't. And,
They don't come home and vote for me.
you know, they've tried to get off the rolls, but this is a way.
So my suggestion is these bills, I think we all, maybe not, but if we're in agreement, could we look at putting them together and possibly looking at, oh, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was waiting till we had exhausted discussion on that subject. I wanted to ask a couple questions about one of the other ones on Senate Bill 438. And by the way, I too have a problem child. On the audit issue, I've handled probably 20 to 25 election recounts and contests, I can now say, for both Republicans and Democrats. My question is, how is this audit different than a recount? It says if it's within 1%, there will be an entire audit. My interpretation of that is it would be a full recount. %1 of the total votes cast, if it's within that much.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the new audit provisions on page 2 of the bill would be done in accordance with subsection A, which is current law, and directs the county election officer to conduct a manual audit or tally of each vote cast, regardless of the method of voting, in 1% of the precincts. That percentage would change to 10% of the county precincts in the specified race with the new provision. But it would be done in accordance with what is already in current law under subsection A on page 1 of the bill.
So if I may, Mr. Chairman, if it's within 1%, then there'll be a quote audit of 10%.
That's correct.
And the quote unquote audit is a recount of 10% of the ballots.
It's a manual audit or tally. I'm not exactly sure what the precise procedure that they would do to do that audit is. Would have to defer to the.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a distinction between the word audit and recount, because in my mind, it's the same thing. Am I wrong?
I honestly don't know.
Is a recount automatic?
Well, under this language, it would be automatic. Right now, it has to be,
I think that's what the difference is. They're making it automatic if it's within 1% versus you would have to request it.
no, and
cost.
I like that. I think, I very much support that concept. I think if it's that close, I think it should be a full recount. That's why I'm trying to understand whether requiring an audit is distinct from a recount, or if we're talking about the same thing.
I think we're talking about the same thing, and I think it's automatic.
In consulting with my colleague here, I think the difference would be the audit is just a portion of the ballots, whereas the recount statutes require a full recount of the ballots if there's a recount request that is granted. So I think in terms of the number of ballots that are counted again and verified, there's the difference.
Well, then I'll make a comment. I don't think that's going to accomplish much, because if it's that close, somebody's not going to be happy with 10% of the votes. It's going to end up in a recount, or at least if it was me, it would. Which, my second question is, who pays for this? The county?
County would, in the recount statutes, it depends on how close it is and what the races are. And in some cases, the candidate themselves would have to pay for the recount. It's a different statute totally.
I know that, but in this new statute with a 10% audit, it would be.
There's no provision. The
County
county would have to pick up the cost.
They would absorb the cost. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You got a question, Senator?
I sure do, Mr. Chairman. So, Jason, are we, in this measure, is it adding any money to help those counties do what?
There is no provision for additional funding for county election offices in the bill.
Oh,
Right,
I was
actually, I
proposing
like
those,
that provision.
those are the three bills that I've looked at.
Now,
And I was also looking at one other bill. And I didn't have him give an overview of that, but I was going to ask him to look at 389.
okay,
But that was the one that I also indicated that our position would be that we'd need maybe to remove this audit by random ballot selection. And I'll have Jason go through that if that's
Okay.
agreeable.
one other comment. As we've been working along, there's been, so think about this. We've had some counties that are short on poll workers. And so if there's a spot where, because of some of the precinct people are not allowed to be poll workers, I thought maybe we could look at amending that and allow precinct workers to be.
Do you have some proposed language?
Senator Hildebrand?
I don't know if you guys remember last year, we passed legislation that if you were on the ballot, you could not handle a ballot for somebody else. The unintended consequence and what the intention of that bill was not to affect poll workers, but the way it's written, it could be construed to see that, to account that. So this language, and Jason has it, and he can get it. He doesn't have it with us, but he's working on it. But conceptually, it would just redefine what that is, and that if you're an election official, that's different than handling someone else's ballot. You're actually working for a poll, so.
Jason, do you have that language? I thought,
We can get copies for the conferee, either now if you would like those, or we can provide them at the next conference meeting.
and we'd like to know which bill that it would be put into, where it would work best.
I can review the bills and provide some guidance on that.
Okay. I mean, I think the amendment as presented sounds very logical. And, out in my area, we have a number of committee people that would like to be, to do that type of work. And if it's based upon the legislation that passed last year, apparently it wasn't drafted correctly, but we can fix that, I think. And as soon as Jason gets us the language and tell us which bill it would fit into.
I do want to clarify, it was drafted correctly as it was given to the reviser, but the person that requested that version didn't quite take into account of people working in the polls. So it would have been the person feeding the reviser the information. So the bill was drafted correctly.
I never besmirch the revisers, especially this time of year. They're putting in 12 or 14 hours a day. So no, I meant no disrespect to our revisers. They do a great job. But we would like to see that, and I think we'll talk, but I think we could be amenable to that. But could we go to Senate Bill 389? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry to slow things down. I was totally unaware that this was an issue, so I'm trying to put my arms around what the issue is, and that is, we're saying people who are running for precinct positions are, under this bill we passed, are not allowed to serve on the election boards? If they are on the ballot. Which would only be in a primary. Could they not work in a different precinct? Because they wouldn't be on the ballot in any other precinct other than their own. That's part of the problem, because the wording doesn't say your ballot. It says on. Well, the lawyer in me says it is different. You're not on the ballot if you're working on an election board that doesn't have your name on the ballot. But that being said, to me, it just sounds like it's easy to clear up. I'm just trying to understand the problem. So are we talking about 389 right now?
We're getting ready to.
We've not talked about it yet. We're moving to that one. First, they brought the amendment up, and we're trying to see where.
But when we get to 389.
I will call upon you, sir. But first, I'd like Jason to give us an overview of 389. Jason, if you would.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Senate Bill 389 was a bill that the Senate passed out that provides that starting with elections held on or after January 1st of 2024, those elections would be required to use an individual, durable, voter-verified paper ballot with a distinctive watermark that's established by the Secretary of State. These ballots would be marked by the voter or a person assisting the voter, or could be marked by a non-tabulating marking or printing device or system. They would be made available for inspection and verification by the voter before being cast, and the voter would be provided with an opportunity to correct any error on the paper ballot before it is cast. They would be canvassed by hand or read and tabulated by a vote tabulating equipment consisting of optical scanning equipment or other counting equipment that counts and tabulates paper ballots. The paper ballot would be the official ballot and would be preserved and used for purposes of audit and recounts that are conducted with respect to the election. There's also provision that for these elections, if the paper ballots are read and tabulated by equipment, then there would be a sample hand-counted audit of the paper ballots cast at the voting place by the election board. The Secretary of State is directed to adopt rules and regulations by January 1st of 2023, and the bill also contains a provision that the use of poll books that do not require a handwritten signature are prohibited.
Questions? Jason, yes.
Now, I don't know how many counties are like mine, but I was trying to listen to that language and run it through my head in terms of how I actually vote as it relates to the use of this word ballot. When I walk in to vote, I'm given a choice. I can either accept the paper ballot, or I can go on an electronic machine, and I like them because it gives me one race at a time. I see right there how I voted. When I get to the end, it gives me plenty of opportunities to say whether or not I'm done or I want to go back. And eventually I hit this button and it prints out the results of my vote. And I have a hard copy, which I don't think fits the definition of this discussion. that that's a ballot, but it is a record, it is a hard copy of my vote, and I have every opportunity to inspect it. And in fact, if I screwed up, there's an opportunity for me to start over. And then I take it over to the tabulating machine, and that hard copy goes in there, and that's how it's counted later. So my question is that piece of paper a ballot?
Short answer, yes.
And why does it have to bear a distinctive watermark? Is there, I've been tracking the discussion over on the Senate, and I've never yet seen what the problem is we're trying to address by requiring a more expensive type, which I assume would be a more expensive type of ballot. I'm, as I said earlier, I've done a number of recounts. You know, we counted every piece of paper, and there's never been an issue raised that it was anything but the genuine ballot. So in this case, and I don't mean, I think it was your amendment, so I don't mean to offend you, but it seems like overkill, and particularly if we're going to, and as I understand it, we're asking the counties to pay for that extra cost.
Correct. Counties would bear the extra cost. And the reason for a watermark is, so whenever you go to the ballot box and you get your paper and you print it, that you're assured a little bit that that's the genuine ballot, number one. And it also helps when you're going through the canvassing process or election process or whatever, if there is ever any questions where the ballots do not come up, the numbers don't match, you can look and you can say, hey, all of these are valid ballots because they all have the watermark.
Yes, and so those watermarks would be on both the provisional ballots and the evidence ballot coming from the machine. So the watermark would be on everything that showed the results of a ballot, correct? And so it'd be two different types of paper. There'd be the one that comes from the machine, and also a provisional ballot would both have watermarks on them. Is that correct?
I want to clarify, not the results, but the actual ballot. So the abstract that comes out wouldn't be a watermark, just your ballot. Your paper verified ballot would be.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Senator Faustino.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for clarification, so hearing this bill, correct me, Vice Chair Hildebrand or Jason Long, please. I thought we were talking about advanced ballots when a ballot comes in the mail to your home address. Are we not talking about that paper? We're talking about the paper of what the ranking member, Representative Miller, described? I mean, what paper are you talking, what ballots?
It would be both. So it would be any ballot that you are going to cast in an election would have that watermark, a distinct watermark from each different election cycle.
Sorry. I think the reason for the watermark, number one, is no one can duplicate that, that paper. Number two, I see it as kind of a chain of custody issue. When you have voting machines, 100 blank ballots go out, 57 of them get used. When you bring them 43 back, you got 43. If you got 42, then you got a problem. If there's been an error on a ballot, then now, where's that errored ballot? You've now got that errored ballot. It's got a record. It's got a path. You're controlling that someone can't duplicate or, so I really see a kind of a chain of custody is what you're doing. I could be wrong. Is that kind of what you're after, Senator Hildebrand?
Close, yes.
I like this part. I like watermarks. I want authentic ballots to be counted, and when you cast a ballot, if it has that mark on it, there's no doubt at a recount, it's a valid ballot. But I would like to move on to the second part that I may not like on this bill, about the audit by random ballot selection, and I'm going to ask Jason one more time to go through that portion of it. Go, so what we're talking about.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the portion being referred to is on page 2 of the bill, subsection B, that if the paper ballots are read or tabulated by vote tabulating equipment, then a sample hand-counted audit of the paper ballots is to be conducted at the voting place or counting place by the election board.
By my notes, I'm not sure that language is clear, and who and how this would happen. I mean, would you be agreeable to remove that? And I know the Secretary of State's office has some concerns about it.
Okay, Senator Hildebrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When we drafted this bill, or I say we, me and Jason, we worked together as a team on this. And so there was no other additional audit process. The Secretary of State issued another one. I think that'd be something we could look at and consider and see, because you don't want a redundance of, you don't want to just
Exactly.
do audits.
We just agreed to the Secretary of State's 1%.
So is your suggestion to take the audit piece out? Is that what?
That is my suggestion, and then we would put that in with the other three bills. Is that something you need to confer? And I need to confer with my.
Yeah, I think we'll take that one. Yeah, I mean, do you want to?
I want to
step
talk.
out,
I
or
want to step out and let the Senate rest.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, the House has met, and this is what our proposal is. Senate Bill 351, Senate Bill 438, Senate Bill 439, Senate Bill 389, with the exception of the removing the audit portion and adding in the amendment wherever it would go that Jason has. And he has that amendment. Would he pass that out, Jason? The one we were just discussing. And I would say that Jason gave us that amendment out in the hallway.
Yes.
Jason, I need one more copy of it. Thank you. And this would be on 439. And Jason, would you explain it? We don't want to violate any federal law here.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the balloon amendment that was just passed out on Senate Bill 439 would make changes to return the bill to the intent of the Secretary of State. As written, the bill potentially would violate federal law in requiring removal of a registered voter within only 4 years, which is not allowed. So the amendment you see there would take the 4 calendar year of no election-related activity and move it down into subsection E as a 5th trigger for the confirmation notice to be sent to the voter. If that particular confirmation notice for that reason is then returned undeliverable and the voter has not appeared in an election during the period for the next 2 federal general elections, then the voter would be removed from the rolls.
And 2 federal general elections, that would be 8 years?
That would be 4
Or
4 years.
4 years? Right.
That's what I thought. Yeah, it'd be an additional 4 years. So it would be 8 years total of no election activity before the voter would be removed.
Okay. Have anything?
Said wasn't quite. It'd be 8 years, but 4 years of no, quote, election activity. The other 4 years is not voting in a federal election. Election activity is defined differently than just voting. Sorry.
No, that is correct. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes. The language is basically providing exemption for candidates who are election office workers. Yeah, the poll workers was.
So that's what we talked about, the poll workers and stuff. We had no objections to that. Which bill would it be?
Considering this is all going into a single bill related to election law, it could just be inserted into your vehicle of 2138 that you've proposed.
Is there any?
Candidates for precinct
Right.
positions.
Only, yeah.
Only.
I understand. So if you accept our offer, then we would, looking at my notes here, where I can't find, we would like to put that in a House bill, which we have as a 2138. Would that be correct?
That sounds good.
Was that agreeable to your side?
You agree? Okay, you agree? Okay.
You agree? Yes. You agree? Yes, I do. Good. Go ahead.
Senators, there's a House bill that we heard in Fed and State and was passed out of committee. It's HB 2565. I don't have the language pulled up, but it's pretty simple.
Did that pass the House, or?
No, but neither did this one we just talked about.
But it didn't pass the Senate either.
Well, neither did the one we just talked about.
Yeah, it did.
It did? Well, then, never mind.
So we can have Jason draft that. Jason, do you need any clarification from us? So that's off our plate.
Okay. So we're down
To
to 418.
And 2056. Do you want, can we go to 418 first?
Please, yeah, that'd be great. Want to give us an overview maybe, or?
Yeah, Jason, he's pulling it out now.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Senate Bill 418 is amendment to a statute that was enacted last year. The underlying statute prohibits the Secretary of State from entering into any consent decree or other agreement with any state or federal court regarding the enforcement of any election law or the alteration of any election procedures without first obtaining approval of that agreement from the Legislative Coordinating Council. The Senate Bill 418 amends that provision to also apply that to the governor and any other officer of the executive branch, and expands it to also include any agreement with any other party, not just a consent decree or agreement with any state or federal court, and would have the pre-approval done by the legislature, or if the legislature is not in session, then be done by the Legislative Coordinating Council.
It's just interjecting the legislature into the process of any agreements, keeping, the governor or Secretary of State's office, whoever it is, they have to also either come to the legislature or the LCC. I think it makes us all part of the same team.
Questions for the reviser?
I believe it's a good concept. I'm willing to look at it and closer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I remember the discussion. I don't remember the result of the discussion, but there's a provision in the law that allows the Secretary of State to respond to emergencies like a storm that happened the night before, that he can intervene. Is that still current law, or did we repeal that?
Still.
And would this change that?
No.
The approval for any changes to election law or election procedures would have to be submitted to the legislature. That sounds like a change of election procedures.
This provision addresses agreements for the enforcement or alteration of election procedures requiring specific approval.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We would put, is this a vehicle for?
No, it just passed the Senate, but we do, me and you have some other shells. Maybe we could get one moved with all the right conferees.
I would suggest we use a Senate shell. We've just used a House shell. If you could find one.
Well, we got one.
34.
34.
Would you be agreeable to use that?
Sure.
All right, Jason, would you put it in 34 if everybody agrees?
We
agree?
will have to, we'll have to do a motion. I'm guessing you gotta change the conferees on your side.
Oh, that's,
That's why I was thinking maybe the House shell would be better because it would only take your action.
I already have my people appointed to that bill. It's 2252.
Yeah, but I don't know if this.
This is the committee. The House referred you. Jason, you can check that, but I'm pretty sure the House.
Did we just do this?
We just did it today.
Yeah, I think that's what happened. I think,
2252.
so I think we're good here then.
We could be, but you owe me a shell.
I promise you own 34. Or we can move one of the Sand Hill Plum into 34 and,
You're not going to touch my Sam Hill.
I would like that to be a Senate bill if we,
You're not going to break the hearts of all these fourth and fifth graders.
I will not break their hearts. They come up and testified in front of us, and I'll tell you,
And
probably the finest group of people I've ever seen.
they did
Great America.
one heck of a good job, but they did tell me, I've run into them downstairs after they testified, and they said, we kept referring to Chairman Barker.
Oh, I heard a lot of Olson.
Yes.
We don't show a change of conferees on House Bill 2252 as of yet on the legislative website. So we just want to make sure that these are the conferees on that bill, if that's the
Understand.
agreement.
I'm looking for an email or a text that at least kind of gave me that indication.
Good,
Oh, here it is. He said, already put Evil and Miller on 2252. And that was from the chief of staff of the.
We can certainly verify with the House clerk on that and put 418 into 2252.
All right, and if it's not, I'll get it re-referred tomorrow, but, I'm sorry, go ahead.
We already passed the Plum bill today.
You did, and we non-concurred. We're gonna concur. Of course, I always love your story.
So when the Sand Hill Plum came up to be worked in Fed and State, I offered an amendment to name the polka the state dance. It failed, okay? So the other day, Sand Hill Plum was in front of the Senate Fed and State. I got on the elevator with a bunch of children, and I said, where are you guys from? They said, Sabetha. So I knew exactly why they were here. So I said, well, let me ask you, do you guys like to dance? And this one little girl says, you're the polka guy.
I told you, they were a bright group, and I wouldn't be surprised if a bunch of them are not up here.
Jason, it just dawned on me, we're going in tonight in about 15 minutes.
Both are.
Yeah, and so if that occurs, I think, I had a text that said it already occurred, but if they might not get the paperwork or whatever, I'll get it referred. Do we all agree that we can go ahead and do that on 418?
Yep.
Okay, we're gonna have to go back in the house, and none of us have probably had any nourishment.
No.
So,
You want to discuss that last bill?
well, let's go back in and then come back.
Call it here later tonight?
I'll call it here later tonight, if that's agreeable.
Agreeable to me.
Or we can start it, we can do it at 8:30 in the morning before we do our others.
We have one at 9.
We could do one at 8:30,
You want to do it in the morning, or?
because I'm not sure how long we're going to be on the floor of the House.
Promptly at 8:30, I'm good.
You're okay? Would that be all right?
Is the liquor bill passed your side?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
We did that earlier today.
I think I get to carry it here in a few minutes, so I probably ought to break loose and get my information and get up there. 8:30? Okay, thank